hello everyone. My name is Jack Chia, and I'm currently an assistant professor of history and religious studies at the National University of Singapore. And my research focuses on Buddhism and Chinese popular religion in Southeast Asia, overseas Chinese history, and Sino-Southeast Asian interactions. I would say that my interest in Buddhism came from my grandmother. So when I was little, both my parents left me in the care of my grandmother, and in retrospect, this has proved to be an important experience in learning about Buddhism. My grandmother was born in Xiamen, China, and migrated to Singapore with her foster mother when she was 4. She was a Buddhist who prayed to Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and worshipped at various Chinese temples. And in Indonesia, I know you all call this Klenteng. So she often brought me to temples, to Klenteng, to participate in various religious festivals and rituals. So I learned a lot about Buddhism and Chinese religious practices, as well as Hokkien from her. And when I was about 6, my grandmother gave me a comic version of the classic novel, Journey to the West, COG, and I'm sure some of you might be familiar with. So I remember I was really intrigued by the magical power and bureaucratic hierarchy of Buddhist saints and Taoist deities as depicted in the comic. So when I was in high school, I read Shi Chuanfa's book, History of Development of Buddhism in Singapore. And after reading the book, I was deeply fascinated by how Chinese migration contributed to the spread of Buddhism from China to Southeast Asia. And I was inspired to find out more about the issues surrounding migration and religious networks in the Southeast Asian region. I think by the time I started my PhD, I already knew I wanted to write about the lesser known and in fact rarely studied Chinese Buddhist community in maritime Southeast Asia, because most scholars who work on Buddhism in Southeast Asia tend to focus on the Theravada Buddhist majority community in mainland Southeast Asian countries such as Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos. So when I started my PhD, I actually wanted to look at the Buddhist, in fact, minority community in the maritime Southeast Asian region. So during my graduate work at Cornell, my primary advisor, Professor Eric Technicolder, taught me transnational Islam and maritime Southeast Asian history. And my secondary advisor, Professor M. Blackburn, taught me Pali and Theravada Buddhism, and also introduced me to her work on Indian Ocean Buddhism. So their work has influenced me a lot to think about the history of Buddhism, monks, and resources in motion between China and maritime Southeast Asia. So therefore, when I wrote my doctoral dissertation on the connected history of Buddhist communities between China and maritime Southeast Asia, which formed the basis of my book, Monks in Motion. So to be honest, I was very happy that my book was shortlisted for the prize initially. So for the EuroSEAS Book Prize, usually what they do is that they will announce the list of shortlisted books. So there were a list of 6 shortlisted books for the prize. So when I was on the shortlist, I was already very surprised and in fact very happy that that my book has received recognition by fellow scholars of Southeast Asian studies. So when I heard that my book received eventually won the book prize, to be honest, I actually did not expect to win the book prize. So I was, of course, very happy, but I would say very surprised to receive the book prize. But I think I'm really grateful to the selection committee for willing to consider a book on Buddhism for the award, because it's usually quite rare for books on Southeast Asian Buddhism and for books on Buddhist studies to win area studies and especially Southeast Asian studies book prizes. So I'm grateful to the selection committee for recognizing and taking a chance in my work. Yeah. So let's say that Monks in Motion, in a way, is a study of Chinese Buddhist migration in the 20th century, but it also tells the connected history of the lesser known Buddhist community in China and maritime Southeast Asia, in fact, which is the place where I'm from. So it actually helps me to think about the history of the very region that I live in, and also the Buddhist communities that I'm a part of. So I hope that my book has helped our Buddhist community to better learn about our past and also in fact better appreciate our past. Sure, of course. I think one of the most important part of Monks in Motion is that it is the first book to document the ideas, activities, and projects of three of the most important Chinese monks in Southeast Asia, namely Venerable Zhumo from Malaysia, Venerable Yan Pei from Singapore, and Ashin Jinarakkhita from Indonesia. And my book has two aims. The first is to present the connected history of Buddhist communities within China and maritime Southeast Asia by synthesizing institutional and intellectual history, as well as local and global history. So my focus is to look at how eminent monks acted as agents of knowledge production in the Reformation of Buddhism by configuring ideas through contestation and negotiation. And second, I aim to offer a new perspective by challenging the kind of conventional categories of Chinese Buddhism and Southeast Asian Buddhism by focusing on the lesser known, yet no less historically significant Chinese Buddhist communities in maritime Southeast Asia countries in Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore. So therefore, my book demonstrated how Chinese migration and contributed to the spread of Buddhism and the establishment of new Buddhist institutions and monasteries in maritime Southeast Asia. Yes, sure, of course. So maybe I will start with Venerable Zhumo. In fact, today many Malaysian Buddhists consider Venerable Zhumo to be the father of Malaysia's Chinese Buddhism. So he was born in 1913 near the foot of Mount Yandang in the Lecheng County of Zhejiang Province in China. So he became a monk when he was 12 and later enrolled at the famous Mingnan Buddhist Institute or Mingnan Foxueyuan at the Nanputuo Monastery in Xiamen, where he became a student of the renowned Buddhist reformer Master Taixu. Following the Communist Party's victory and the establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949, many Chinese monks actually decided to leave mainland China. So Venerable Zhumo first left for Macau, which was under Portuguese rule, to become the founding advisor of the Macau Buddhist Society. And in 1954, he migrated to Penang and remained in Malaysia until his death in 2002. So during his 5-decade religious career in Malaysia, he served as an advisor to the Porte School or Puti Xueyuan, founded and served as the inaugural president of the Malaysian Buddhist Association, established the Triple Wisdom Hall, and started the Malaysian Buddhist Institute, which is an important institute for Buddhist education. In 1998, Venerable Jumo became the first Buddhist monk in Malaysia to receive the title Datuk from the head of state of Penang for his contribution to Buddhism and education in Malaysia. Yeah, and maybe I will continue with the next monk in my book, who is Venerable Yen Pei. Most Singaporean Buddhists remember Venerable Yen Pei as a scholar, social worker monk responsible for bringing the ideas of humanistic Buddhism or Renjian Fojiao to Southeast Asia and promoting them in his lecture, writings, and social activism. He was born in 1917 into a poor farming family in the Yangzhou city of Zhejiang province in China. And in 1929, he was ordained as a monk. So Venerable Yen Pei was very much a product of the Buddhist reform movement in Republican China. Like many of his contemporaries, such as Venerable Zhumo, Venerable Yen Pei received formal monastic training at Buddhist seminaries where he was influenced by Master Tai Shi's idea of humanistic Buddhism and Master Yin Sun's idea of humanistic Buddhism. Venerable Yen Pei's vision of Buddhist modernism based on the vision of humanistic Buddhism emphasized the active propagation of the Dharma, incorporation of religious practices into everyday life, and shifting the focus of afterlife salvation to this worldly engagement. So Venerable Yen Pei arrived in Singapore in 1964 and spent the remaining 32 years of his life building a Buddhist community in post-colonial Singapore. His religious career in Singapore can be divided into two phases. The first, as the abbot of the Ling Fong Prashna Auditorium from 1964 to 1979, and subsequently as a social activist and the founding chairman of the Singapore Buddhist Welfare Services from 1980 to his death in 1996. And of course, last but not least, I'm sure many of you are very familiar with Ashin Jinarakkhita. And of course, for Ashin Jinarakkhita, we know that most Indonesian Buddhists considered him to be the first Indonesian-born Buddhist monk. And of course, Ashin Jinarakkhita played a very important role in the propagation of Buddhism in the world's largest Muslim nation, which is Indonesia. And I would say that for Ashin Jinarakkhita, he played a very important role in making Buddhism, in fact, less Chinese and more Indonesian in order to promote the Dharma during the New Order period in Indonesia. His Buddhayana organization used Pali language text along with the selection of transliterated Chinese Buddhist texts for religious activities. And more importantly, in order to make Buddhism less Chinese and more Indonesian and compatible with the first principle of the Pancasila, Ashin Jinarakkhita introduced the concept of Sanya Api Buddha as the Buddhist version of God, in a way which he pointed out could be found in the Sanghyang Kamahayanikan, a 10th century text produced in the reign of King Sindok from East Java. And of course, more importantly, he mobilized his disciples from various parts of Indonesia to spread and support this idea, which actually allowed the survival of Buddhism during the New Order period. But more intriguingly, Ashin Jinarakkhita considered himself neither a Mahayana nor a Theravada monk. His important Buddhayana movement, which he pointed out, was in line with the Indonesian motto of unity in diversity. And his Buddhayana movement stressed that despite the existence of various Buddhist sects and doctrines, they all lead to a single path to enlightenment. His vision of a Buddhayana movement was to promote an indigenous Indonesian Buddhism for a culturally and linguistically diverse Indonesia. And by doing so, he was able to effectively propagate the Dharma in various parts of Indonesia. Thank you. So I actually spent 2 years conducting research for my book. During my first year, I spent my first year in Southeast Asia. Really went to, of course, as I mentioned earlier, to Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore. Conducted both archival and library research, but also interviewed various monastics and also lay Buddhists who actually really helped me a lot to think about the history of the Buddhist community in maritime Southeast Asia. And for the second year of my research, I spent a year in Taiwan, but also went to China and Hong Kong to gather some material to think about how the spread of Chinese Buddhism to Southeast Asia actually evolved across time. So there was a really, what I would say, a wonderful period of learning experience for me, spending 2 years collecting various different materials for my book. Thank you. That's a great question. I think for the younger generation, I think in terms of academics and younger scholars, I hope that my book can inspire them to look beyond the so-called common sense, look beyond the kind of Buddhist majority communities in their research, to think about Buddhist communities as minority communities in their research. And for instance, when we think about Southeast Asian Buddhism, as I mentioned earlier, that scholars tend to focus on, in the past, mainland Southeast Asian Buddhist Theravada majority community. But I hope that my book has helped them to think about ways that we can actually study minority Buddhist communities and also consider their contributions, their networks, and their kind of global connections with the broader Buddhist communities in the region. So I hope that my book can inspire the younger generation of scholars to think outside the box. For the younger generation of Buddhists, of course, I wrote Monks in Motion for an academic audience, but I also hope that my book can reach the Buddhist community as well. So I think for the younger generation of Buddhists, I hope that they can learn from the experience and the stories of the eminent monks who have contributed so much to the development of Buddhism in our region. And I hope that they can learn from their experience, think about the ways that the kind of contributions, the hard work they put in the propagation of the Dharma. And I hope that the younger generation of monastic and lay Buddhists can learn from their examples and also to think about how they can further contribute to the community that we have today. So I would say that Ashin Jinarakkhita is quite different from the two other monks in a number of ways. I think first is, of course, Ashin Jinarakkhita was born and raised in Indonesia. Unlike the other two monks, Venerable Yente and Venerable Jumo, they were actually born and raised in China. So the kind of experience they had were, I would say, quite different in their outlook and in terms of their understanding of Chinese Buddhism. So I would say that Ashin Jinarakkhita had a more Southeast Asian kind of upbringing, Southeast Asian Chinese diasporic kind of background, as compared to the other two monks who actually grew up in China, and their kind of understanding of Chinese Buddhism, I would say, is in a way quite different. And of course, related to that, I think the second difference was, of course, Ashin Jinarakkhita was actually educated, of course, in Indonesia. As I mentioned, he was born in Indonesia. He was educated through the Indonesian education system. He went through the colonial Dutch school, and then he actually went to to the Netherlands for his university education. He went to the University of Groningen, and then before eventually became interested in Buddhism first through the Theosophical Society, and then eventually learned from Venerable Benching at the Guanghua in Indonesia. So his Buddhist experience was quite different from the other two Chinese monks who actually were ordained at a young age in a Chinese monastery and later went to a former Buddhist seminary, which was both of them, in fact, both Venerable Zhumo and Venerable Yanpei were educated at the Minnan Buddhist Institute. So their kind of Buddhist education and experience were very different. I would say. And then, of course, third and more important difference was the kind of social political environment that they experienced of course, for Venerable Yanpei, who actually propagated the Dharma in Singapore. And we know that, in fact, Singapore has a Chinese and, in fact, Buddhist majority community. So for him, he was able to operate in a way quite easily in a Chinese majority population that actually practice Chinese Buddhism. So for him, it wasn't so much of a concern. And for Venerable Zhumo, even though he was propagating the Dharma in Malaysia, which is a Muslim majority country, there is a very sizable Chinese and, in fact, Buddhist community in Malaysia. In fact, Buddhism is, although it's a minority religion, is in fact the largest minority religion in Malaysia that consists about 20% of the overall population. So in fact, there's also a very vibrant Chinese Buddhist presence in Malaysia. But unlike in the case of Indonesia, where Ashin Jinarakkhita had to propagate the Dharma, he was actually working with a very minority Buddhist community. They made up about 1 to 2% of the population. In fact, in the world's largest Muslim population. So in fact, Indonesia has the largest Muslim population, not only in Asia, but in fact in the world. So the experience was very different. But more importantly for Ashin Jinarakkhita, during the New Order period, where of course we know that during the New Order period, President Suharto banned the use of Chinese language and Chinese culture during this period. So it was difficult to propagate Chinese Buddhism or any form of Chinese Buddhist scripture. So Ashin Jinarakkhita had to, in fact, make Buddhism less Chinese and more localized. At the same time, propagate a mixture of Mahayana Buddhist ideas through the transliterated Buddhist texts, but also through the Pali Theravada Buddhist scriptures. So we see a very interesting and, in fact, very different way of promoting Buddhism in Indonesia as compared to Malaysia and Singapore. And I would say that Ashin Jinarakkhita and, of course, his Buddhayana movement was, in fact, very successful during this period because they not only had the approval of the Suharto's government to propagate Buddhism, but in fact, he was able to spread the Dharma in various parts of Indonesia. So I would say that was his very important contribution to the Indonesian Buddhist community. Thank you.